And the
podcast
begins with a song of rebellion.
How can this
podcast
be my life?
CD Burners.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to CD Burners. Today, we're talking about the Wonder Years, the greatest generation.
Let me pull up my Joni notes.
I need to pull up the Joni notes, too.
I think she did I texted her over the weekend, and I said, hey, really good job with these notes. You did a really killer job. I said, you're starting to sound like me.
She did do a great job. And I think I'm just, first of all, I'm just blown away by this album. But let me run through the numbers and the stats, the dates, and then we can get into it.
Great.
This came out May 14th, 2013 on Hopeless Records. And it actually had an incredible chart position, which I can't believe. Number 20 on the Billboard Top 100 for an album like this on a small label like Hopeless. That's crazy. Number 4, alternative album. Number 3, independent album. Number 2 on vinyl. So everybody back in the Tumblr days was buying the Wonder Years on vinyl and posting a picture of it on their Crosley record player, according to Joni, the Tumblr hero.
Yeah, that's where you got this is an Urban Outfitters staple.
Enough people bought this vinyl to where they pushed it to number 20 on the Billboard 200.
Wonder what was like the top vinyl of that year, actually.
Top?
Probably like
selling
Arctic
vinyl.
Monkeys or something.
Yeah.
What else was that during that year?
Dude, Arctic Monkeys.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Are you serious? Is it the guy with the one with his face on it?
It's the AM.
Oh, that's the one with the...
Yeah, it's with the little squid. It's with the sound wave. As soon as you said it, I was like, that's right.
That's crazy. All right. Well, the first time I've ever been right on this podcast, and it's not about the band we're doing.
No, it's about a totally different band. But dude, this fucking album is amazing. And I can't believe that I didn't listen to it in 2013. I think I'm actually like a big Wonder Years fan now.
Me too. 100%. I really am 100%. They kind of did the same thing to me, or the way that I thought about them was the same way that I felt a little bit about 4 Years Strong, like they would kick my ass. Just listening, just because I know Came Out Swinging.
Because they're like big bearded red-haired guys.
Yeah, and so I had like the connotation that like my ex-girlfriend really liked them.
She liked the Wonder Years?
She liked the Wonder Years and 4 Years Strong a lot. Like that was her.
She had a type.
She had the type of like music she liked. But I always could never deny Came Out Swinging. I was like, this is
that song fucking rocks.
I was like, this is such a good song. Like
always been one of my favorites to play at emo night.
It is really good. And I knew, and same with 4 Years Strong, like in the same thing. I really was like, these are really great songs. But I think I got pushed away from it from personal stuff. I'm really happy that we did this album.
Dude, I might have a hard time actually talking about this album because it moved me to tears. Like,
yeah, I agree.
It changed my brain chemistry this morning. Like, I haven't been like gut punched by an album in so long.
I really feel the same way as you. It's very rare that we do an album and it's over and I go, God damn it, it's over. Like I wanted it to keep going. And I didn't do any research before I listened to the album. I listened to the album, like I did my like day stuff. And then I went online. I was so worried that this was going to be one of those albums we did where it was like negative reviews all over the place. And like, people didn't get it. And it was in fact quite the opposite. When you look up this album, like album review, unless you're a band like MyChem, it's really rare in this scene to have a ton of people going, hey, I'm doing a review of this album, doing my thoughts on this album. I'm doing it's really rare. And when it is, it's usually like a guy in a room that somehow is the same size as him. It's like a 4x4 room and he looks like he committed like a horrible crime next door, committed a crime, went to this room that somehow is the same size as him and recorded an interview. That's what they usually are. This was not like that. There are a lot of reviews online that go into detail why this album is one of the best albums, not only as genre, but maybe of all time.
Just to name a few, Metacritic gave it 97 out of 100. Alternative Press gave it 4.5 out of 5. My favorite is Absolute Punk. He said that instead of giving it a ranking out of 10, he said, "It is my firm belief that the greatest generation has no real precedent in this community. It's my belief that there isn't another band in pop punk right now that can write a record this good." Like he loved it. This album was very critically acclaimed and well received, and I think for good reason. This is like a much more mature sounding version of pop punk than I think had ever been done before. You know, you listen to, we've done a lot of albums like Newfound Glory. It was actually really interesting listening to this back to back with State Champs, The Finer Things, which
Crazy that your notes are like so similar to mine.
it's funny
Like
because
you're naming the things that like I
Your
am talking.
things.
Well, no, I was just like, I know this gets labeled as pop punk and a lot of it is, but it's also not, because there's a point in time where I think as a songwriter, you're just writing songs, but I feel like this lives in a world outside because it feels like a collection of songs as opposed to Newfound Glory, where you're like, this is pop punk for sure. That is my word for
Really?
word written note.
dude, on the same page. This is like a mature pop punk. I feel like this is like the evolution of pop punk. Like we saw it be this funny, silly thing that started out with Blink and Newfound, and like, you know, they were making boner jokes and shit. And these guys took a lot of that like melody, that aggression, that like fun sound, that melody, and like balanced it out with like very mature themes. You're not hearing about heartbreak. You're not hearing about shitty ex-girlfriends. Like this is a introspective look at Dan's life, and he's 26 years old and he doesn't know what the fuck he's supposed to be doing. He's like, I'm in this band, we've put out 4 records, it's doing pretty good, but like look at my cousins they're going to bed with their wives. I don't have a wife. I have nobody waiting for me at the train station.
It's funny that you mentioned that, how it shaped like to come, because I think there's a melody on Passing Through a Screen Door that every pop punk band was just like, oh, we're going to do that, but a tiny bit different, but it's almost the essential pop punk chorus melody. Like that's where I feel, I'm sure somebody's going to butt fuck me on this, but like to me, going back and looking back, that's kind of like, listen, pull up the chorus to it. Like, cause I feel like this is like you'll be like, oh, every pop punk band was like, oh, we're going to do this. This is the melody that is a staple of the genre. Right? Like every band was like, that's what we want to do. And we're going to do it a little bit different, but it's going to come from that.
Passing Through the Screen Door. Like, okay, so here's the thing with this album. I feel like I would rather talk about like the individual tracks and like the lyrics and some of the things that like really hit me, rather than like a deep dive, like stories that I found. Cause I didn't really find too many stories about this album. Did you?
No.
Like we could still touch on that stuff, but let's talk about
the
some of
only
these songs.
thing that I really wanted to touch on in regards to the album is that people viewed it as a trilogy, and I don't understand that. Like I didn't really find any good explanation as to why it was a trilogy.
It's just a band put out 3 albums.
Yeah, it was just like
and they're progressively getting better.
Like you could just say that any 3 albums in a row is a trilogy.
Yeah,
like I don't know like why people were like, oh, it's a,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if it's like a lyric thing or I couldn't find like a good answer.
Well, we can ask Dan if that was intentional. I don't believe it was.
Yeah, in my opinion, it doesn't feel like it. I don't know. Maybe somebody just said it and ran with it.
My note for Passing Through a Screen Door, since we talked about it, and I kind of already referenced this lyric, he says, my cousins go to bed with their wives. I just wanted to say that I related to this because I've always felt like the goth cousin. Like on the East Coast, like I feel like families are like really big, and like my dad has like 4 siblings and 3 or 4 siblings. And then my mom has like 4 siblings, and I have a shitload of cousins, and they're all like normies, and they like have normal jobs and like got married young. And I was always like the weird emo in the corner.
Yeah. This album was for us.
Yeah.
Like this album was legitimately for us. And I think that that's why it resonated with so many people. And like rarely do I find, when you talk about, you know me, I'm like melody first, you know, like lyrics almost come last, and then they add once I like a song. This was one of the bands where I was like, oh, these are all good, great lyrics. Like this is, I relate, those are the things that like I hung on to. And, you know, I remember hearing Brand New for the first time, and the way that he told stories, I think a lot of people tried to do. And I don't think that it was done very well or different up until this album.
This is what I was trying to find. This meme, me at every family reunion, and it's Edward Scissorhands, just surrounded by like normal looking people.
What do you think? You look how you look, and then take that and put it to me.
Yeah.
And that, you know what I mean? Like I legitimately know. I feel exactly. It's like my favorite lyric on this album. I'm sorry, I don't laugh at the right time. It's like just like,
yeah.
It's literally like he does such a good. It's hard to do these lyrics because they are personal, and sometimes when you bring in personal things, they don't translate into song. Like, but this album did whatever that was perfectly, where you can take whatever personal thing that he was saying or singing about and relate it to you. Whereas I think other bands would be like very specific. They'd be like, I'm sitting with TJ and I'm looking at this fucking dishwasher. And like, that means something to me, but it wouldn't necessarily mean anything to anybody else. And so I think the way that he took these personal situations and applied them into song was so different than those other artists.
Everybody references this one very specific lyric where he talks about the type of cigarettes that his grandmother smoked, True Blue cigarettes, and the scent of a hint of copper tone. And, you know, I think that that's like the prime example of like the amount of detail that he goes into with somehow making it still emotional. Like you're saying, like there's some weird thing where the specifics that he gives are so relatable.
I can tell you the best way I can describe this album to anybody who hasn't heard it or has heard it and is having a hard time putting it into words. There's 2 things that I think. One of them, I was like, oh, I'm so smart for describing this album this way. And actually both of them, I feel like I'm very smart at this. It sounds like how a smell, like a nostalgic smell, when you smell a smell and it brings you back to a certain time and place or your childhood. That's what this album sounds like. It also sounds, and I know you'll probably go into this a little bit more, but this is going to be, I'm really proud of this quote. So just for the record, it's like if Slaughterhouse 5 was an album.
I love that book.
Isn't it like, it's like you're at different places and different times and then there you are. And like, he does such a good job of doing that because it is he's not only talking about like relationships and like it is, a reference to World War II. And then he's talking about current day and all this other shit. And it really felt like it legitimately was like, oh, I knew it was something and I couldn't put what it was. And I was like, it's just like that fucking book. Like when I read that book, I was like, put those 2 things together. Smart. Genius. That's a really smart quote. I should be a music reviewer that I hate.
I mean, you have a music podcast, so
feel free to take that and quote me. Anybody.
Yeah, dude, this album, it has a lot of these, like, I feel like it's like you said, it's all kind of all over the place, like different times and places. It's an exploration, I think, like into his generational trauma. Like the album is called The Greatest Generation, which is a reference to a Tom Brokaw quote where he, talks about the generation that fought in World War II. His grandfather, presumably, who passed away while they were making this album, or I think right before. That's what the song Dismantling Summer is about. There's a lot of like looking at himself in relation to his grandfather and his family lineage and being like, I would be too much of a pussy to go to war. Like, what am I doing with my life? Like, these themes are just not things that you heard in pop punk, really.
It also kind of speaks to, I'm going to pick Timmy up really quick.
Timmy, get over here.
It also did this thing where it was like, he is, you know, if you're walking down the street and you saw Dan,
yeah,
you'd be like, that's just a guy.
Yeah.
You know, like that's just the truth. Like he's just a guy. You wouldn't think anything of it. And there are plenty of people that are just a guy that are walking down the street. There's a lot of that and self-awareness in this album. There are, you know, we have rock stars that like look like rock stars. I very much relate to that. I don't know if that has anything.
You don't look like just a guy. You look like a rock star.
But I feel like just a guy. I feel like I'm like just a guy walking down the street. And, you know, it's my opinion of it. Dude, that's the thing. It's like making me think about myself. Right.
Right.
And like, what other album have we listened to where I'm just like, oh, I'm taking an introspective look at myself and like, am I just a guy? Am I having an existential crisis listening to this album? Like not a lot of other albums that we've reviewed have, you know, really pulled that out of me. I'm just like, let's get this fucking thing over with. Speaking the goddamn song.
Just a Guy. One of the music video for Passing Through a Screen Door. Did you watch that?
No.
It kind of touches on that. Like it's him on a train and he's going, you know, every stop he's looking out the window and he sees a different version of himself. He looks out the window and he sees like himself wearing like a Phillies shirt and like coming home from the gym, or he looks out the window at the next stop and sees a version of himself wearing like a suit. Like he's like a finance bro. And then he gets to the next stop and it's like him with a wife and they're like really happy with a baby carriage. And, you know, he's just contemplating all the different directions his life could have gone. And he's like, did I make the right choice? I could be any of these things. And am I doing the right thing? I'm just a guy.
Yeah. Which is crazy because like, I feel like the way that he feels in that, I feel like that every second of every day, like one second, I'm like, sweet, I want to produce music. Next day we do emo and I'm like, sweet, I'm a DJ. Like I fucking like, next time I like design something, I'm like, could be design. Like, it's like all of these things that you think about, you know, and I can't imagine what it's like for somebody who took the route of saying, all right, this is what I went to college for. This is what I'm going to do. Oh, fuck, I married this lady. Oh, shit, I had a kid. What? Like, what else could I, you know? And then you start liking something else and you're like locked in this. And like the way that this album kind of fluctuates, I feel like would fuck up the average, like 35-year-old accountant.
Yeah. It's a midlife crisis.
Yeah.
Like if you're just like middle America and you're like, I don't know if this is the right life path for me. But I think that's like, I think about that stuff all the time. I'm about to turn 35. Like that's midlife crisis age. And today this album fucked me up and I'm not even middle America. Like I was just like, fuck man. Like my parents are getting older. Like, am I doing the right thing? My grandparents are sick. Like what the fuck, man? But yeah.
That's how I felt for the last like 2 years.
Yeah.
Like every day. Yeah. That's how I feel. I'm like, what is happening? I wake up every day and I'm like blown away.
Time is flying.
And I understand, like, I finally understand like a midlife crisis. Like, I think that's maybe what I'm going through.
Yeah.
I really actually think so.
Yeah. Maybe you need to buy a sports car.
Yeah. I have to buy
get like a super young girlfriend.
I need a Hellcat. Is what I need. I need a
Corvette.
Yeah, I need a Hellcat is what I need.
Maybe you should get one of those 3-wheel cars.
The Polaris?
Yeah, the Polaris slingshot.
Yeah, I need a Polaris slingshot. Dude, that will help. That will solve the God-sized hole in me. That will fill it.
My dad almost bought one of those. Like when they sold their house in Utah, and I think he was having like a not end of life, but like 3/4 life.
On your deathbed, you're like, all I've ever wanted was a Polaris.
Well, he like sold his business and then like sold his house and was like going into retirement. And I think he was like, what do I do? And at one point he was like, should I get one of these? I was like, absolutely not. No, you shouldn't.
Can't say how I really feel about them on the podcast, but let's just say like they're like a tourist vehicle that I see up and down Hollywood Boulevard all of the time.
Blasting music.
It's crazy. They're like the three-wheeler. They're what are those?
Tricycle?
But the little kid ones,
they're called like big wheels.
Yeah, it's like big wheels for adults. It's fucking, and it's always blasting like Fetty Wap. Like that's like, you'll never see a Polaris that's not playing Fetty Wap.
So funny.
It also, like, this album, there's albums that you listen to for the first time, like all the way through, and you go, have I heard this before? Which is like the nostalgic feeling. And, you know, there are a couple albums that have done that to me. Movements, Feel Something did that. Like the first time I heard it, it felt familiar. This, listening to the whole way through, I was like, this feels familiar in good and bad. Like, I was like, I feel bad on a Sunday listening to this. But then I kept listening. I literally kept listening to the first song over and over. I didn't get to the second song, you know, for a while, because
the first song is so good. They're there.
I like kept going back and being like, is this the right band? Did I miss this? Did I miss something? I kept going back, and I never do that. I never do that with an album.
Going more into some of the tracks that I liked, and I thought this was an interesting two-parter here. In one of the songs is called "The Bastards, the Vultures, the Wolves." I personally think that this song is about the music industry, hence the industry plant in the room with us. She just
didn't say anything about it.
I think this song is about the music industry. He says, there's actually also like a reference to their last album too. He says, I know I was an angry kid, but I scraped and scratched for this. And now I'm stuck holding a bomb with a fuse that's still lit, and they'll never let me rest again. And yeah, I came out swinging, but I'm still walking out with 2 black eyes and a split lip. So I think he's referencing like Came Out Swinging, the song. They've had like some success now. The band is like about to blow up, and you know, the people around him are never going to let him rest again, which brings me to the 4 shows that they played within 24 hours across America to celebrate the release of this album. So on May 10th, they played a 6 p.m. show in Philadelphia. Then they drove to New York City, played a show at midnight, then went to Chicago the next day, played a show at 10 a.m., and then flew to LA to play a show in Anaheim that started at 8 p.m.
10 a.m. is fucked up.
Yeah.
10 a.m.
Chicago,
is a fucked up time to do anything.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's cool.
I want to see videos from that. Yeah. I didn't look that up.
Yeah, 10 a.m. is a fucked up time to do it, but I'm sure that that's like the only time that they, you know, like, logistically, like routing all of that.
Yeah,
what a cool thing to do.
Yeah, that's a fun idea in concept, and then you have to do it.
Theory,
like, dude, when we've done 2 emo nights back to back, I like want to die.
Yeah, it's like always like, oh sweet, we'll do this, and we're so close to that. Let's just do it. And then, dude, you know, also our instrument is a USB.
Yeah.
You know, like you don't have to fucking lug in an Ampeg 8x10. I wonder where they did the Chicago show.
Oh my God. It's subterranean,
if
and they're bringing
up
the
sub T. If they did it in those fucking, on the stairs, like that at 10 a.m. Like what a fucking.
You had to load in at like 7 too.
Boy,
after
that's
playing New York the night before.
Really, really funny. I really would love to talk about that. I don't know, dude. It's like,
let's ask him about it.
I want to shout out Joni on this. I don't know if we already did. I forgot. I think we did. But she did really great notes. She did really great notes on this album, and I kind of want to read some of hers just because I think she did such a good job. Basically, any pop punk album that's come out since 2013 can be argued to have the Wonder Years influence. They brought a grittier, more punk forward sounding back to pop punk that a lot of bands coming from the scene have now pulled influence from. I can't tell you how many times I've played a show and someone else on the bill has so obviously been inspired by this era of pop. Even though this album isn't my vibe sonically, listening to it and researching it really made me admire the Wonder Years as creatives, an emotion that I've been missing in the TikTok era of music. The album is juicy, songwriting gold that reminds me of all my favorite coming-of-age books. I read along with the lyrics while listening, and it definitely deepened the experience for me. I also can't really tell you why, but I cried while reading almost every review of this album because I think it brings out the poetic side in people. I also think it's just an album about the exact phase of life I'm in right now.
See, we both said this exact same thing, and that's what this album does. Like, it's so relatable to no matter where you are in your life. Yeah, Joni's like 22.
Yeah. And she did bring up a really great point, and I would have not thought about this. She said, also random, but listening to this album finally made me understand what people mean when they say pop punk is misogynistic. Ooh. This rarely talked about romantic relationships, and it caused me to think about the surplus of albums from the 2010s that only talked about girls and blamed them specifically for why their whole life was shit. Retrospectively, I don't know why it took me this long to read lyrics like, that girl, she's such a bitch, are misogynistic, but also you live and you learn. I still don't think pop punk is inherently misogynistic. There's a reason so many teenage girls flock to this type of music, and basically why every girl in the industry has a story about how they realized they wanted to work in the music business because of the emo scene they grew up in. But it gave me some night food for thought.
Very nice, Joni. Very nice and well thought out.
I was like, you're starting to sound like me.
She's really smart. She's a smart girl.
I know, but these opinions are like things that I would say, but not as eloquently.
Did you have any tracks on here that you didn't like?
That I didn't like? No.
Yeah. Me, Madeline, fucking didn't like that song.
I don't know. It's one of those things where I was like, sweet, it is this is in its entirety, the album.
Yeah, I think you could get rid of it. I think like with the 13 song album, like you can lose one or two. And that one, it didn't hit the mark. And that's a weird thing for me to say because I usually love like the acoustic.
Yeah, that's usually your shit.
Yeah. It didn't every time it came on, I was like, okay, skip, next. But I think there's just so much other good content on this album that like you don't really need it.
Do you want to listen to me read a bunch of... No, it's actually not a bunch. I took two really great Reddit quotes.
Okay.
These are from Reddit. They're not from me or Joni. It took everything that Upsides and Suburbia had been growing and sent it off with a bang. Again, like, why do those two things have to do with this thing? But a true snapshot of the amalgamation of anxiety, depression, stubbornness, and melancholy of being in your mid to late 20s and realizing you're not a kid anymore. Another person. It's my favorite album of all time. Nothing else has changed the direction of my life like this album did. It changed my songwriting and led me to starting a new band that would give me experience that I had given up on ever having. It also made me feel less alone and less like a failure. I credit this album with finally giving me the push I needed to get into therapy, which has been innumerable positive repercussions in my life. Came out as bi and non-binary, left an unhealthy marriage, began to get a handle on my OCD, depression, and anxiety. Like, this caused somebody to like literally like leave their marriage.
Yeah, it does something to you.
Yeah.
It makes you think. Like, it's so introspective and like so profound that I think anybody can relate to it at any point in their journey as a human. And like, that's what makes this album so good. Like, I think this is my favorite album that we've done. And I'd never listened to it before. Like, there's obviously some albums like that I have a nostalgic attachment to, but like this one I really had never listened to before.
Same. This is, I'm right there with you. Like, this is one of the ones where I don't know how I missed it because it's pretty much everything I like. I think it was just I was like, oh, man.
You know who produced this album? Speaking of albums that you love.
Who?
Steve Evans. He produced Saves the Day Through Being Cool.
Did he really? I never remember these producers' names, dude, except if they're like people we talk to.
Steve Evans, yeah, he did Can't Slow Down and he did Through Being Cool.
Damn.
He also did Dillinger, Snapcase, Lifetime, Eyes Set to Kill. He worked on the previous album, Suburbia, I've Given You All. And then he continued working with them and helped them develop their sound for this album.
The word suburbia like really rings true in this thing, in this whole thing. You know,
that's the album before this.
I know, but like the way that he writes lyrics and the way that, you know, this album sounds and like, you know, I guess the first prior to, I think really spoke to that class of people that were like middle class maybe. And it was like, shit, I'm in a, you know, like, am I supposed to have struggle? Am I supposed to have less struggle? Am I supposed to, I feel really normal. And I think that is like the wording and the way that he writes stuff. You have like a far, far, far group of like very wealthy people who have like, really, like on the lower class side. And then you've got like this middle class that, you look at like with no struggle and no real, like they're just going to do the next step in life. There wasn't really an album, pop punk is pretty in that lane, but it never really addresses it. It never really addresses it in a way that is meaningful. Sometimes the lyrics will mention like shit about being middle class and like be going to school, shit like that, high school, like stuff like that. This did it in a way where it reminded me of like being in a cul-de-sac, being in a development, like, or, growing up in that environment. And it made me really think about it.
Well, I mean, this album does talk about like being really poor though. Like the chorus of the one is like, all we had are hand-me-downs. All we had is goodwill. Like it talks about being poor.
Well, I think that's why if it hit me like this, it had to have hit like,
it goes back to what we were saying. Like it can hit you at any stage of your life, whether you're married and you're in the suburban cul-de-sac and you're looking at it and you're like, shit, what did I do? I married the wrong person and I didn't follow my dreams. Or if you're like, oh, I'm in a band and my grandfather is dying. Does that make me a bad person being out here on the road? Like that lyric of like, if I'm in an airport and you're in a hospital bed, does that make me a bad person, a bad man?
Yeah. Right.
Like that fucking hit me.
It's so funny. Now I'm thinking about it. I'm like, dude, if we grew up like the way that we did now with this economy, we would be like dirt poor. Thanks, Obama.
If I'm in an airport, what kind of man does that make me? That's what it says. This record is.
What were your
awesome.
favorite songs on there?
Dismantling Summer, that one with the line, if I'm in an airport and you're in a hospital bed, that one really got me. Passing Through a Screen Door, I thought the lyrics were incredible. I didn't like Madeline. I loved The Bastards, The Vultures, The Wolves. But my absolute favorite is the closing track to the album, I Want to Sell Out My Funeral.
Yeah, so sick.
Like when I heard that lyric for the first time, Aaron and I were just in the kitchen. I think I was making breakfast and this album was on just in the background. And I heard that and I just like stopped and like started spacing out. And she's like, what? I was like, that lyric, I want to sell at my funeral. Like in the line of work that we do too. And like thinking about like how we're always trying to sell out shows and sell tickets. I want to sell out my funeral. Crazy.
Yeah. And then like, it also does the same thing in the same breath that makes you think, what if I don't, this is actually from a tweet that he had. He said, like, my grandfather sold out his funeral today. Like it was like the day of his grandfather's funeral. He tweeted that. And then it became this song. And this song is so interesting because it is kind of a recap of the whole album. Like they bring back all of these choruses and hooks that you've heard already from the album and they put it in the final track. And it's like the perfect closing track to this album. Those are my favorite songs were the first and the last song of this album. I think they're the best bookends that you could like have. There was another band that did this and everybody hated it.
Who
was it? We did it.
I think it was Cartel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I really liked it, but and everybody loves this track, obviously, but everybody like hated that one, Well, and I just found it funny that like you can do it so well and then you can, people are like, nah, it's not. Like, I think that's like a corny thing to do. And then in this case scenario, it's the same concept, but just executed differently.
What do you have for, if you like this, you might like that?
Bro, you're never going to believe it. But this album reminds me a lot of Tiger's Jaw.
Tiger Jaws,
specifically the album Spin. There's a couple riffs on Spin that are really, really similar to this and in like the same guitar tone, the same situation. I wonder if that guy did. I'm just going to look up who did.
I think that was probably Will Yip, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if he did that album.
Will Yip.
Yeah. It was, but there's that album in particular. If you like this, if you like this album, you will love Tiger's Jaw Spin.
I think that, you know, this album kind of launched all of those kind of things, like all of those kind of bands. Like, I think there's so much influence taken from this album for bands like Modern Baseball, Have Mercy, the Front Bottoms. I loved hearing like the amalgamation of Dan's influences. Like, he's said that he's a big Motion City guy, and I could definitely hear the Motion City references and influence. I could hear, like, there's 6 guys in the band, which is a crazy amount of people. And they've all been in the band the entire time.
It's too many people.
But they get to do some really cool stuff, especially with like dueling or tripling or quadrupling vocals. Like, they have a lot of different parts. So that kind of reminded me of like Taking Back Sunday.
But like if Taking Back Sunday could sing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But just like, you know, the way that Taking Back Sunday would do the dueling vocals, for sure.
Being a dickhead.
And then I wrote Saves the Day, which you could definitely hear. I think that's largely due to Steve Evans. And one thing for me that really I wasn't expecting this album to feel like is Manchester Orchestra, which I love Manchester Orchestra. And I was like, this songwriting style is really similar to Manchester Orchestra. Like that first Manchester Orchestra, I'm Like a Virgin, Losing a Child album, like the way that melody and aggression are like blended and the way that the lyrics are really specific and detailed. I feel like Manchester Orchestra, if you like this, you'll like Manchester Orchestra.
That was another band that I just never, I like all of the songs that I've heard from them, but
we should do that album.
Let's do it. Yeah, I bet I will. There's a couple of album or bands that you've showed me that I knew that I would. You know what I think I did for you?
What?
I think I did the Saves the Day. I think you like got Saves the Day after we did that.
I mean, I got into Saves the Day. Yeah, I got into it a lot more, I think, when we did this album, and just from knowing you and like, you know, how much you love Saves the Day. And like, I was like, okay, there's probably something to this. And like, I listened to those. I listened to them before though. Like in college, my friend Eric Grava like burnt me a Saves the Day CD because he loved Saves the Day. And I remember it sitting on my desk in college for a long time.
It's strange because it's like not pop, like, is it pop? Like, I don't know.
It's definitely pop punk, but it's just not jokey.
It's in that realm of like those bands too. Like they get lumped in, and I don't know if it's like whatever the waves of it are. And this is kind of where I start thinking that like, you know, things become they're just songs. You know, it's hard to place. You know, I guess you have to categorize something.
Sure.
As something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, like, it's not like it's not like alternative butt rock. Like it definitely leans more pop punk, but I think they're doing something different and special for sure.
Yeah, I was really surprised with this album. I'm really happy we did it. Rare moment.
All right. You got anything else to add here?
I think honestly, let me look at my notes, but I think I really, really covered everything that I wanted to say. I think I had some very good quotes in this one.
All right, guys, we have an excellent interview with Soupy, Dan Campbell himself, coming up right here on CD Burners. Thanks for listening. We'll see you soon.
Get it?
Well, guys, I'm so excited to be here on the Medical Maladies podcast.
I mean, as a doctor, I'm excited for you to be here as well, man.
Yeah, and we just kind of keep going into what's wrong with us.
Guys, please welcome to the podcast Dan Soupy Campbell from the Wonder Years. Welcome to CD Burners. Thank you for being here. We've been doing a deep dive on a lot of albums that are being played this year on When We Were Young specifically. And I have to say that The Greatest Generation has been my favorite by far.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you.
And I literally wasn't, you know, I know the hits of the Wonder Years. I know like how hard like Came Out Swinging goes when we play it at emo night, but I'd never really like taken a deep dive into, you know, your discography or really the band in general. And this album just like fucking blew me away, man. Like we both really, really loved it. Just wanted to get that out of the way before we dove into some of the specifics.
Wouldn't it be funny if we got to this interview and you were like, yeah, it's just Not for me, but some other people might like it. So let's talk.
We've done that. We've been there before, dude, and we've absolutely been. We've done interviews with people where we're both like, I don't know how the fuck we're gonna do this. I like hate this album. Like it's so difficult.
Because this isn't like a review show. It's more just like an objective, like kind of deep dive. But yeah, it's really hard sometimes to be like, okay, we know we have to talk to the artist at the end of, our segment of this. Like, how do we phrase this in a way that isn't mean?
Well, I'm so glad you like ours.
Well, no, it was
because I have incredibly thin skin.
Well, here's the thing, like TJ and I think TJ and I felt really, really similarly about this. There's like stuff if you're at a certain age, and especially with this type of music, like this type of music, if you skip like 2 years of shit, you're just like, I missed that entire thing. Like, I think that was, like this for TJ and I. And so going back and listening to this, I feel, I said it on the podcast, like rarely do we do these podcasts where I don't want the album to end. And I think that I think this was probably our favorite one. I mean, Saves the Day. And then for me, at least, and then this album, I think was some of the best shit that we've done so far. And it's nice to do this podcast because we get to go back and actually have to sit there and listen to it and then be like, oh, this is why this is the way it is. And there's a couple of things though I just wanted to, like, off the top, it's so hard to read about this with someone saying that this is a trilogy album. And I am like, I couldn't find anywhere where it was like, here you were trying to start something and end something. I don't know if that was like a fan's interpretation or yours.
So it was a really kind of like flippant remark that I made. We were, kind of talking about the record for this trailer that we put together, that actually Brennan from Valencia cut together for us. And I said, it's kind of like the end of this trilogy about like growing up, which in hindsight is a little silly because like now I don't feel like I ever stopped growing up. But it felt to me when we wrote it that we had reached kind of a conclusion that we had been striving for on the previous two albums. So like I have this other band called Aaron West and the Roaring Twenties, and those three albums are very much trilogy. It's a narrative project. It's telling the story of a man over the course of a decade. It's all fiction. It's written like a TV show. This is less that, and it's more kind of an abstract idea that like after writing The Upsides and writing Suburbia, I've Given You All Now Nothing, that on The Greatest Generation, like it felt like I was coming to the conclusions that I had been kind of looking for throughout those previous two records. And, but as you age, you realize like you learn more every year. And, hopefully some of the things that you thought a decade ago, still ring true to you and you were kind of on the money there. But like a lot of things, like we continue to adjust and evolve. And so like, it's funny that has become such a like important sentence for a lot of people. Like you said, anywhere you read about it, you see, and the trilogy, it was to me like more about how I felt in my life writing the album than it was about like a narrative through line.
Like the actual thing itself.
Yeah,
I mean, that makes sense. And it also makes sense, like what you're saying. You're like, how are you supposed to end something that just keeps going? Right. It does, all right. That makes sense. It sounds like at the time you're like, yes. All right, sure. This trilogy, this ends. And now, 10 years later, you're like, maybe not.
Well, I think the thing is like part of what the Wonder Years are is like, in a way, like a commodification of like our humanity and like specifically mine, right? It's like I'm writing these songs about my life and I'm processing the world through music. It's how I, kind of work through the good and the bad of life. I take those things and I process them through song. And so, yeah, like it's kind of never ending. in a way, right? Like every album is going to be a continuation of that, because like it's not a story that has a beginning or an end. Well, I guess it does. I was born and I will die, presumably, someday.
That's when the trilogy ends.
Yeah, that's when the epic
The
will
whatever
end,
the yeah, that's when it ends.
when I am inevitably assassinated.
I think that leads to an interesting question. This is 11 years after the fact. Now you're playing this album in full at When We Were Young. Are you guys actually doing that?
We are. We might have to cut one song for time, and so we're arguing about what that song would be. Just because I think they gave us enough time, and I don't know if this is true of all the artists, to play exactly like if we didn't have to like breathe or switch guitars or like retune or anything
straight through,
and everything was like 2 BPM faster, we'd not. So we might have to cut one, which is a bummer. But
are there any songs that you are performing now, that have taken on like a different meaning now that you're 10 years older? Did they mean something like different to you? Maybe you wrote it thinking one thing when you were 26, and now at 36 you're like, oh wow, like that line means something totally different now that I'm a father. And
yeah, well, for sure. I mean, passing through a screen door is like the obvious answer to that question. And like the feeling of being like at 26 being like, man, am I falling behind at life? And then like realizing like life has no like particular timeline, and like societal like expectations for when you get married and when you have kids are like not relevant to your personal life. Like you have to do the things that like are a part of your fucking journey, right? Like what makes you like appreciate being alive is the timeline you have to run on. And also like, now I have kids, and all the parents are also my age. Like all my kids' parents at school are like the same age bracket. Like it's not like we did this thing, a decade later than anyone else. It just felt like it at the time because, you look at the internet and you're like, holy shit, all these people I went to high school with just like had a kid, and I'm fucking floating through space in a van, sleeping on people's floors. Like what the fuck is my life? So like my perception of like what is adulthood and when it occurs is obviously like shattered. And then there are some lines that have taken on like kind of different meanings, right? Like there's like the I don't want my children growing up to be anything like me line was like about kind of clinical depression, and just being like, man, I really hope that my kids don't inherit this. And then kind of the realization that like, now that I'm a father, well, you can't really control that, but you can control the tools that you give them to deal with that. And you can control like everyone is going to have trauma from their childhood. You don't have to call it that. You can say it's just how growing up was for you, whatever you want to say. But like everyone has things from their childhood that affect the way that they interact with the world as adults. And there are things, from mine that negatively impacted the way that I interact with the world. And I am now, as a dad, like, every week I do therapy and I try to isolate what those things are. And I try to do my best to not pass them to my kids. And so the line has taken on this kind of like more robust meaning about like generational trauma and about like coping mechanisms and tools and preparation.
It sounds, it's what you're saying, I think, is okay, how do I say this? I feel so the same as you, but I'm obviously not the same as every single person that's listened to this album. And I feel like everybody that you just spoke to, while everybody who listened to this is so different, they feel exactly that same way. And that's why I think that this was such a wild album for TJ and I both to listen to, is because obviously we don't think the same about a lot of stuff, and we're both at different places in our life, and we're both dealing with a lot of different shit. And the way that we came out of listening to this and talking about it, it kind of put us on the same page. Like we're both, it made everybody on like the same playing field of being like, oh, this is what I'm going through right now. And, there's a lot of very specific things in the album, and there's a lot of very specific things in you do it in a really, really great way where you can be specific, but people can relate that specificity to their own lives. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I got you, dog.
Yeah, I said one of the look. I don't know if this has ever been said. I couldn't find it in an interview, but I said that this album reminded me of like an audio version of Slaughterhouse-Five.
That's interesting. That's cool. I just never been said in an interview. But I think that you're hitting on something with the hyper specificity and the universality of the record, which is that like I have always been of the belief that true and raw, real, honest emotion is going to resonate with people despite details. And like you don't have to talk in these kind of like broad, bland platitudes in order to have people access those feelings. I think when people feel that something is real, they connect to it. And one of the big things I've always said, and I've always thought, if I ever got a chance to do this, right? Like that, you go through these stages of being a band where you're like, this is fun and cool, and I can't believe I get to play shows. And then it's like, wow, we get to go on tour. Like this is, and every step you think this is the last step. No one will let me get anything beyond this. And then you get to make a debut, and then people like that debut, and then you get to make follow-ups to that record, and then it becomes like the weight of expectation that comes with a follow-up. And I've always said that the thing I refuse to do is disrespect the intelligence of my audience and pander to what I think that they want from me. As someone who loved this genre, listening to bands put out successive albums after they've had success, I felt intensely pandered to. Like, oh, well, we know our audience is 18 years old, so let's write songs about what it feels like to be 18 years old. I just always felt like that was so transparent to me. And like, I want to write songs about what I'm actually going through. And whether or not someone's feeling exactly that at exactly that moment, they feel the core nerve of the emotion, and that's what they connect to. This has just been a big kind of like North Star for me as a lyricist to follow that.
You touched on it a little bit at the top of this answer, the longevity of this band and the different iterations of this band. And, there's 6 of you guys, and it's the same 6 guys, which is super rare for any band or any group that's working on something creatively. What do you think has kept you guys together through everything?
Well, I think we're friends first. We weren't a band that like, and no disrespect to any bands like this, but there are definitely bands that are like, well, there's someone that's a songwriter, and then they start looking for musicians, and they start just hiring professional musicians, and they don't have a relationship with them outside of the fact that they needed a drummer and they found a drummer, and maybe they get along, maybe they don't. We are friends before we were a band. We all knew each other. We're from the same hometown. We went to 2 neighboring high schools. 3 of us went to one, 3 of us went to the other. We all played the same local shows. We were all in a bunch of bands before this. So it's like kind of about like the fact that like before we were a band, we were friends, I think is important. But I also think everyone plays an important role, and everyone gets like kind of an equal say in the creative process. And like we don't have, we're not the kind of band where like I show up with sheet music and say, play this, play this, play this, right? Like I'll show up with an idea and say like, hey, here's this thing. It's like, I'm going to kind of play it at the simplest version of it. And like, now it's on us as a band to turn that raw thing into something that is a Wonder Year song. And like, I think that the push and pull of 6 members and their various influences and like proclivities are what turn them into Wonder Year songs.
So we've kind of like mentioned, because it's hard to be like, all right, this type of music, like this, like you're playing When We Were Young. It's like, yes, it's like such a broad strokes of like what this genre is. And I think that, this album got labeled, a pop punk album in a lot of areas. And when I was listening to it, was like, these are just songs. Like, I was like, this is songs from this band. And I like, well, yeah, it has some of the pop punk stuff. It felt really, like, I don't know. You guys could have been on tour with like Oasis also if this was like the first release you guys put out. And I don't know if that's like, do you ever like look back at this album and you're like, if this was the first thing we put out, would we be in a different lane? Because the songs are, dude, like, what they're fucking awesome songs, and songs in general, not like songs in a lane, right?
I think it's kind of a broader life lesson to me that I've learned over the years. It applies to the genre, but it applies to a lot of things, right? Like, I cannot control what the press or anyone else tags the band as genre-wise, right? All I can control is the art that I make and the way that people react to it. And so I try not to waste a lot of energy being worried about this, should it have been classified this way? Should it have been classified that way? Could we have a different career? I think at this age, and I certainly have worried about those things in the past, but at this age, all I try to be is grateful for the chance, because like, dude, think about how many people, my high school, my graduating class, just my grade of my school, 11 or 1,200 people. And I was nowhere close to the top 100 of musicians in that class. There's some really, really talented motherfuckers, right? And a lot of people want to play music. A lot of people want to start bands. A lot of people want to start punk bands. A lot of people do them. We've gotten to do it as a career for a long time. And not just as a career, but the career that we specifically like chose. Every call we've made at every turn, like, no one has gotten in the way and said like, hey, that's not the right creative decision. Like, we did it entirely on our terms. We said fuck you to people we didn't fuck with. We did it exactly the way we wanted to do it. And what we ended up cultivating was this fan base that is so wonderful. They're thoughtful, they're empathetic, they're progressive, they're joyous, they take care of one another. Like, I couldn't feel any luckier to play music to the people we play music to. And like, everyone's invited to the party, right? Like, everyone can come. I would love for there to be more of those people, but I'm so grateful that we get to play to the people we play to, because they fucking rule. It's just like the honesty of it. They fucking rule.
Let's talk for a second about something that you just said, doing it on your own terms and kind of saying fuck you to people who have told you you should do it a different way. This album,
a more polite fuck you.
More polite, yeah. I guess just the push and pull. That is a relationship that happens with every producer and every band. When you guys were working on this album with Steve Evans, what was the push and pull like? Were there any moments where you guys disagreed on the artistic direction, and how did any of that sort of tension or disagreements influence the record?
There weren't any.
There weren't. Okay.
Steve, part of the reason we went back to Steve after Suburbia is like, he didn't really. All he did was take the songs and make these little tweaks that just were like, hey, this part's more impactful now. Steve has never gotten in the way of a thing I wanted to say, has never changed a lyric, unless the only time we've ever changed lyrics is like, hey, this is a little blocky. Could we say the same thing with less words, right? There's never like, hey, this sentiment isn't going to play, or this hook isn't big enough, right? Steve has always said, has always looked at us and said, like, I'm here because I love the art that you guys are making, and it's my job to make it a little bit better. It's not my job to change it. And that's why we picked him, right? Like, it's the same, it's like the reason we picked our managers, the reason we pick everybody is like, there are people who say, like, we love the shit you do, and we want to help you keep making it at the biggest level you can make it at. It's been cool.
Well, I guess let's dive in a little bit about like the actual recording process. I've listened to a few interviews with you, and it seems like you have a really crazy, awesome memory. Like you can pinpoint like where you were when you wrote certain songs or like certain shows that you guys have played over the years. Can you bring us back to like what days were like in the studio recording Greatest Generation with Steve and the rest of the band? Like, are there any specific memories or moments that stand out to you, and just like what was it like?
I mean, the process with Steve is interesting because of the physical limitations of the studio we were working in. We're almost never there together, right? So the time we spent together was in pre-production, and pre-production with Steve is like, and maybe it's not about Steve, maybe it's about us, because it's also been true of other producers we've worked with. When we come in to make a record, some bands come in and say, "Hey, I want to make a record. I got some lyrics. Let's make a record. Let's write a record together." We're not that band. When we come in, the song has been written, demoed, listened to, ripped apart, demoed again, ripped apart, demoed again. So by the time we're getting to Steve, he's like, yeah, they're basically complete songs. Hey, what if you tried changing this kick pattern here? Like, what if we just, this chorus should extend one more time? So that's kind of what we do in pre-production with him. And it's just all of us in a room just playing it, because like to us, like nothing is more important than our live show. And so it's got to feel right in the room. And the energy has to feel right in the room. So we do everything like that, get everything pre-pro'd. Steve has a notebook he's filling out, which is like this part, blah, 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 right? And then when we go into the studio, the first thing we do for every song is, as a whole band, we play it over and over again until we get the tempo to exactly how it should feel live. And that's probably the most arduous process of the record, because again, like we're obsessed with how it's going to feel when we get on stage. And when you put the AirPods in, you put your headphones on, we want that record to feel like you're watching us play live. We're not a big band. Like, we're not a big, like, gleaming production band. We want it to feel like you're in the room with us and we're fucking playing the song, and you feel the energy. The energy is the most important thing of any Wonder Years song, any Wonder Years record. And so we spend a lot of time being like, ooh, you know what? This chorus needs to bump up 2 BPM. And then Steve will build a ramp and we'll play it again. How did it feel there? And we'll get to the point where we're cutting BPMs in half. Where like it needs to come down to half a BPM, because we're so like obsessed with those little tiny changes.
Wow.
But then from then onward, we're never together. We're together at the house we rented, but it's one person at a time, because the other room in the studio can't fit us.
Do you know who I actually just saw an interview yesterday with who's the dude that did Olivia Rodrigo and
Dan Nigro?
Yeah, he it's really interesting. He is like, I change 1 BPM in like the chorus of a lot of these songs to fit the pocket and to fit all of this stuff. And in my, as like now that we like DJ, I was like, I couldn't think of a more annoying thing in the entire world, right? Like I couldn't think of a more obnoxious and annoying thing. And I was like, but that's so fucking cool to be like, I'm so obsessive over changing something a half a BPM or a BPM to make it fit exactly the way that you want it to. I understand the having it feel right live. Was there anything on this album or any part that you guys were like, fuck, this is so good, how do we make this feel like it's not translating to live? And did you guys get it? Like, how did you get it to that? You guys could have written the whole thing and been like, this was perfect live, but or if there's a part in general, like anything that you've written where you're like, dude, I can't get this to do live. It works as like an acoustic thing. I can't get it with like full band.
I don't think that we have that. So we work it for so long. Like I don't think we've ever. It's rare that we abandon a song. If we have a song and we're working on it, like if it got to the point where the whole band is playing it together and it is like recognizable as a song, like we've given it a title, we almost always finish it. and then recently, like, there was one song from The Greatest Generation that almost got to that point and didn't. And we went back and finished it for the 10-year anniversary, and that's Goddamn It All. There are a few other demos from that record that didn't quite get to that point, and we had enough songs, and so they ended up on the cutting room floor. But like, if we're feeling it, or we feel like something's there, we're just gonna. I mean, we don't write records fast. We wrote that record over the course of like 6 months, and we rented this. There's this kind of like, or it used to be like a legendary practice space in our town that we grew up in, where like there's like tags on the wall from like when Hoods were on tour through the area in like 99 and shit, right? And it was gross, like really a fucked up place, like really dirty, really dingy, like shitty power, like uneven sight, like just like there was a dead bird in the ceiling panel, just a fucked up place but we were there every day. We showed up. It was like every fucking weekday, every morning, we all show up there and we just work. And I think like the only thing on that record that I feel like, if I could go back and make a change, we had this demo of the acoustic song Madeline that we like loved how lo-fi it sounded. And instead of just being like, cool, let's put it on the record, we were like, let's try to recreate that with really expensive microphones. And so that's it's such a self-inflicted wound to be like, we wish it was shittier. It was literally like, we want it to sound like it's recorded through an iPhone mic. Yeah. And everyone's holding their iPhones. And then we put up $2,000 mics in the corner and be like, let's try it like this. And then once we finish it, we'll turn down the quality. Like, what the fuck were we thinking?
That's so funny.
That's kind of what, like, that's truly like the question I was getting at is like, sometimes you just, there have been played in or recorded shit like in a how, or like whatever, like on a computer, like making shit a while ago and then trying to translate it to live, and it just never works, and it's never as good as the shitty first version.
That is the biggest unforced error on that record for sure. Because the other thing is, like, I had at this point barely been able to play guitar. And so like when it's an iPhone and I'm in a room, I can do it 100 times until it feels good. But I was like, oh my God, I'm wasting studio time. Right? Like, I got to get this done. And like, I played it too fast and too clunky. And it's just better. We could have done that one better. That's the big unforced error on that record, is like overthinking that song, or like the presentation of that one.
I want to just bringing it back like a couple of beats ago. You were talking about the gratitude, and it was really, really interesting to hear you. Like, I'll like probably go back and like watch you, because I'm like, I'm watching somebody, as myself, I'm an egomaniac with an inferiority complex, right? Like, those are and so I'm trying to get in the middle. I'm always constantly trying to get in the middle. And the way that you were talking about you and this album and where you're at now, it sounds like you are, in the middle, like where we all, I think, as people kind of strive to be. I don't know if that's because you are 10 years older, or you're a parent, or all of these things that, we're just older, but when you were writing that album, it's hard. And when you were speaking before, it's hard to not look at it as, because I do this, and you spot it, you got it situation. It's like the comparison, like looking at everybody else and being like, they have this, I don't have, why don't I have that? Like, why don't I? Do you still find yourself like, especially in today's media, like, do you find yourself being like, I got to put this fucking thing down? Like, this is not.
There are times where there are opportunities that like you get jealous of. Like, man, I really would, not because I don't love what we have, but because it's like, dude, wouldn't it be cool to play Red Rocks? Like, wouldn't it be cool to play the Garden? Like, man, my friends get to do this cool shit. And that's when I have to remind myself about gratitude and about like the likelihood of being here at all. And like, I think that you spoke to a couple of things that really kind of like ignited a thought process in me, which is like to say that like I am by nature really fucking competitive. Like I just am. Like if we're playing something, I want to win it. And I think that like there's this idea that like competitiveness in art and competitiveness in community are like antithetical to one another. And I like firmly disagree with that concept. Because like when I sit down to write a Wonder Years record, the goal is not to write the best Wonder Years record. The goal is we're going to write the best record this genre has ever fucking heard. That's what I want to do. I want to elevate the whole genre. And then I want my friends to go listen to that record and go, I'm going to top it, right? I want to top that thing. And then I want to listen to their record and go, I got to top that. And that's how everyone gets better. It's like the competitive push to get better. I'm rooting on my friends. There's this, there's an interview that Derek from Stage Champs gave that I reference sometimes where it was for Kerrang. And he said, I think we're the best pop punk band there is. And I loved it. It reminded me, there's like I don't know if you like wrestling, but there's this like legendary CM Punk promo that he cuts on John Cena. He goes, I don't hate you, John. I hate this idea that you're the best because you're not. I'm the best. And like, that's how I felt, right? Like I love Derek. I love that he thinks he's the best. I want to be the best. I want to write the best record in the genre. And like, that is how we avoid complacency. And, I think it's healthy for the entire ecosystem if everyone, every time, is saying, this is the defining record of this era of this genre. And like, to me, you know, and maybe it sounds egotistical or whatever, I think The Greatest Generation is the defining record of that era of the genre, of that wave of pop punk and emo. That's my take on it. And you don't have to agree with it. But if I didn't feel that way, I shouldn't have put the fucking record out. If I don't feel like we wrote the best record in our career, if I don't think we write the best record in the genre, I got to go back to work. It's not done. That's just how it is.
Well, I think we both agree that it is the best.
Yeah,
it is that defining.
It's really kind of you. Thank you.
We absolutely do agree.
And I think, you know, that's a pretty perfect place to leave this interview. Dude, I have one more question for you. This interview comes out after When We Were Young, so feel free to speak freely or just speak about where you're at right now. Let's go back to the beginning. You guys were debating which songs to cut from the set. What are you thinking right now?
Well, the obvious one is to cut Madeline because the guitar switch is extra time.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, not only are we going to have to, you know, not only is it the length of song, you know, of the song, but we also get to cut out the time where someone brings me an acoustic and then I give it away.
Right.
So that's like probably what will end up getting cut. But there were some discussions of like, if I had to say objectively, what is the weakest song on the record? There's probably 4 that I think are in contention. And every time I say this, our fans are like, that's blasphemy, right? Mm-hmm. Like, because there's a sect of people that love every song. Right. But the 2 most contentious ones on the record are Madeline and An American Religion, because it's the acoustic song and then it's like the like blazing fast punk song. They are the 2 outlieriest songs in the record. So of course they're going to be the most polarizing. They're also both really short and don't do us a lot of favors as far as cutting it for set length. So I think that like one of the other discussions is something like Chaser, which is a song that we love, but is long it's a bang for buck. Like it's long for the amount of pop it gets. And then We Could Die Like This is again, like that's like a kind of a longer song. You know, it's probably pushing 4 minutes. It's probably 3:45. And, you know, it's like, if you have to balance it, that one might end up being one of the ones that's on the cutting room floor.
Well, I hope that it's none of them, but I have one more that doesn't have anything to do with the album.
I'm here for it.
You know, I'm so happy we do this podcast because the music that like I have tend to gravitate to now, then since we like live in this world, is like really vastly different from like what this is, and I'm so happy that like we get to do this, and I still get to be like reinvigorated every single time I listen to these albums. But like, I've recently been listening to a lot of different shit, and I'm just wondering, like, what have you found like, what do you listen to? Like, what if bands, artists are you like fucking with where you're like, damn, that is really fucking sick?
Right now,
Yeah.
this is the same answer as everybody else. I'm listening to the Sabrina Carpenter record.
Dude,
I love
that's
Sabrina
crazy.
Carpenter.
I hate it. And
Dude, that's insane.
I know I'm in the wrong is the thing. Like, I know I'm able to admit when I'm wrong. It doesn't do the thing that it does for everybody else for me. I
Go
like her as a
listen.
person.
Go listen to Juno. Juno is the one.
All right, let me just put it in. I've tried so many times.
Okay, so Sabrina Carpenter. I'm listening to Christian Lee Hudson's new record, which is like some really great like narrative, like literary, like singer-songwriter stuff that Phoebe Bridgers produced. Man, what else have I been spinning a lot? Let me look at my Spotify. Give me a second.
Yeah, I love this. Like, this is like what I really, really, really like. It's so
I've been
because
listening
it's so
to this Australian band called Suzi. Suzi. I've been listening to Matt Karakis from Citizen is releasing some new solo stuff, and his stuff is really fucking good. Father John Misty is kind of always on the list. What else? I rediscovered this like 2003 like early post-hardcore band called In Pieces that no one's ever heard of, but I really liked it. They're on Spotify, but only as a split with this band Craig. So the artist is In Pieces / Craig. But the song's Part of Me Dies. It's fucking great. My drummer just released an EP with his hardcore band called Skull Presser. That's really fucking good.
What a cool! It's an awesome name. It's a great name.
Yeah, Skull Presser is really good. Positions of Power is the EP. I'm always listening to Chapel Roan. I'm always listening to Bruce. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, fuck yeah, dude. Thank you so much for taking the time to hop on the pod with us today. And I know we'll both be in the crowd singing. I just want to sell out my funeral at the fucking end of the set. I can't wait.
Thank you so much, man.
It'll be fun.
I appreciate it. Well, thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, dude. Thanks for doing this. This was really, we were like both pretty came together and we were like, oh god damn. Like at this, from this album. So
that really means a lot. We, like I said, we don't put music out flippantly. There's a lot of forethought, a lot of effort, and a lot of revisions, and it doesn't come out quick. So it's worth it when people love it.
Awesome. All right, dude. Thank you so much, and have a good rest of your tour. And we'll see you in Vegas.
Thank you. I'll see you there.